You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Wednesday show with K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. Roger, thanks for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Shelby.
Roger, today wanting to talk about some different things that have been coming across your desk in a multitude of different ways. And first, talking about the new rules with the H-2A program. And can you give us a refresher on what is the H-2A program?
Well, Shelby, that's the temporary ag worker program that helps employers who anticipate a lack of available domestic workers. And so if you have foreign workers that are brought to the U.S. to perform either temporary or seasonal ag work for such things as planting and cultivating and harvesting, then this is the program that will assist those farming operations, or at least it's designed to assist those farming operations in finding those workers. But, of course, once you are in the program, then you become subject to the rules of that program.
And those rules have recently had some changes?
That's right. Effective June 28th, there's a new final rule that the Department of Labor has published that will take effect, and that is a rule that will impact the temporary farm worker program. And its stated purpose is to increase wage transparency and state when an employee can be terminated for cause and prevent employer retaliation against temporary seasonal ag workers. Plus, there are expanded safety requirements and more employer disclosure requirements and new rules for self-advocacy of workers.
What are a few of those different things that are impacting the workers and farmers?
Well, it's going to be more difficult for a covered employer to terminate workers because the rule has new restrictions on the employer's ability to terminate workers for cause. You've got to go through quite a labyrinth of warnings and write-ups and all those types of things before you can terminate a worker, and then there are additional rights those workers have. So it's much more detailed process for terminating workers under the program. And workers that are under the H-2A program have the right to get paid for 3/4 of the hours offered in the work contract, even if the work ends early. And also that same rule, this same rule gives them housing and transportation until the worker leaves, and payment for outbound transportation. And if the worker is a U.S. worker, they have to be contacted for employment in the next year unless they're terminated for cause.
So what is for cause really when it comes to termination?
Well, basically when the employer demonstrates that the worker has failed to comply with employer policies or rules, or has failed to satisfactorily perform job duties after they've been issued, as I mentioned, progressive discipline, unless, as the rule says, the employee has engaged in egregious misconduct, or I should say the worker has engaged in egregious misconduct. So basically what this is saying is that the employer, the farm operation, must have pretty detailed policies or rules in place detailing what the job duties are and what the expectations are and what the discipline levels are going to be. And I think there's probably a lot of farming operations, particularly smaller ones, that don't have that established set of procedures in place, and they need to have that done under this new rule.
And Roger, within this article that you shared, there's also a point that talks a lot about a seatbelt. Yeah,
that's an interesting one because under the rule, vehicles that are required by the Department of Transportation regs to be manufactured with seatbelts, in those vehicles, the farm employer has to retain and maintain those seatbelts in good working order, and you cannot operate the vehicle unless each worker is wearing a seatbelt. So that's going to be an interesting one. The enforcement of that one, I really kind of wonder about.
And when are people going to be required to follow this new ruling?
Well, as I said, it takes effect June 28th, but there's kind of a time frame here where people can get used to the new rule because only applications for H-2A employer certifications that are submitted to the Department of Labor on or after August 29 will be subject to the new rule. So there's a transition period. Yes, the rule becomes effective June 28th, but it only really applies to certifications submitted to Department of Labor on or after August 29. So you've got that transition period of a couple of months.
What would you recommend for farms who use this H-2A temporary ag worker program to go ahead and get started with?
Well, there's a good list of information on the Department of Labor's website about what employers need to be doing to start to get ready to comply with this new rule, and that's probably a good place to go. But this is an important rule. There are a number of farming operations in Kansas, obviously, and in the plains and out west and in the south that are in the program and do utilize the program. So it's important for these farming operations to be aware of what this new rule is, because the penalties can be rather severe depending on what is violated.
Roger, another topic you've come across mentioned in your recent blog article, the right of first refusal. And what is the right of first refusal?
Well, a right of first refusal allows the holder of the right the ability to buy property on the same terms that's offered to another bona fide purchaser. And so, maybe I'm a tenant or maybe I'm a family member and I want to buy that farmland. Well, what this right gives me, and I want to get it in writing, is the ability to have the right to buy that property on the same terms if it's offered to somebody else as a bona fide purchaser. And so once I'm notified of that right, I can either choose to buy the property on those terms or decline and allow that property to be sold to somebody else. So it gives me the first crack at that property. It's not going to be sold out from underneath me. And that's pretty useful, I think, in many ag land transaction situations where there's a desire to ensure that a particular party has a chance to acquire the property.
And on the seller side of things, really important that is offered?
Right. It is. It's critical that the property actually be offered to the holder of the right before it's sold to someone else. So if I'm wanting to sell property, but I've given a right of first refusal to somebody else, then I take the offer that I've received and provide that to the holder of the right to see if they want to exercise the right. If I don't do that and I ignore that right of first refusal and go ahead and sell to the third party, then the holder of the right can sue me for monetary damages, and the third party that either had actual or constructive notice of the right of first refusal can be sued for specific performance. So you want to get these things in writing, and then you want to abide by them.
You just mentioned it, but reiterating a point you often make, that it's important to record everything and have your ducks in a row.
Right. Not only get the right of first refusal in writing, I think it's a good idea to record it on the land records to put the public and any potential buyer on notice. And then also, I think it's a good idea to investigate changes concerning the property. One might be to who are the lease payments being made to. So I think the holder of the right has to stay vigilant to protect their right.
One more topic for us to touch on that is from your recent blog article, From the Desk and Email and Phone, aerial crop dusting.
Yeah, that's a big issue, and there was a news story out of Texas, Shelby, just last week where two crop dusters collided midair, and one was killed. One miraculously is as far as I know, as we talk, is still living. But the point of what I was writing was on the liability issue, and that story really brings that liability issue home. If I'm the farming operation that is having the crop dusting done, I don't want to have my employees do that, because if there's an event like what happened in Texas that occurs, I'm going to be liable to some extent, maybe to a great extent, as the employer. So I want to hire an independent contractor to do my crop dusting, and if there's a mistake, if there's drift that damages somebody else's crops, or there is a collision like this, then that's not my problem. That's my concern, but it's not my problem from a legal standpoint. And there may be some state-level regulations that come into play, too. For example, in Arkansas, violation of aerial crop spraying regs constitutes evidence of negligence, and that negligence of crop sprayers can be imputed to landowners if it's an employee. That's why I reiterate again, you always want to hire an independent contractor in these types of situations.
And Roger, as we're talking about these are just a few topics that I'm sure you hear about most days. And so how do you go about sorting through and finding really the value in topics you're being asked?
Well, that's a good question, Shelby. I do get numerous questions every single day, and if I were to count them up on an annual basis, it's probably in excess of 3,000 to 4,000, I think, easily over the course of a year. And they vary on all topics like this, and I just try to take them as they come in, and some are more urgent than others, and some it takes me quite a while to get to, and so that's just kind of a snippet of some of the things that I've had to deal with recently.
If people would like to read more on the topics that we talked about today or other topics, how can they do that?
That can be found on my website, washburnlaw.edu/WALTR, or on the Ag Manager website through the Department of Ag Econ at K-State.
Roger, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today and share with us a few things that you've been hearing about.
My pleasure.
That was K-State and Washburn law professor Roger McEowen. The topics we talked about today came from a recent blog article of his titled From the Desk and Email and Phone, Ag Law Style. If you'd like to read more about these topics and other topics, you can find this article linked in today's show notes on agtoday.net or by going to washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. Again, that's washburnlaw.edu/WALTR. You can also find it by going to agmanager.info, clicking on contributors and selecting Roger McEowen.